Okay, so today we're going to talk about the concept of bar mitzvah. So we all know that at the age of 13 by a boy, and 12 at a girl, they become bar mitzvah. But our question today is, why 13? What is so special? What is so special of the age 13 that at 13 they become an adult? In fact, maturity starts at the age of 18 or 21. You could buy alcohol, you could vote, but at the age of 13, you're still a little kid. You know, imagine a 13-year-old decides the president. That wouldn't make sense. Or imagine he's driving a tractor trailer. I would run off the highway and stay away from that situation. So why do we give the sacred mitzvot of Hashem to a little kid that are still immature? So today we're going to speak about the source in the Torah of the bar and bat mitzvah and why we choose such a young age. And we're also going to talk what makes Judaism unique over all the other nations, that it starts at the age of 13. So a little while after Jacob left his uncle's house, as we discussed last week, he gathered together his whole family and he finally arrived into Israel. He returned with a lot of wealth, and his only daughter, Dinah, went for a stroll in the city and the streets of Shechem. We know the Shechem city today in Israel, and she was raped by one of the Shechem, the prince of the city of Shechem. The city was named by his name, and she was raped by him. Adding to the insult, she fell in love with him, he fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. Now, Shimon and Levi, when they found out about this, that Shechem wanted to marry their daughter, they made a trick on the entire city. And they came over to everyone and they said, if you circumcise yourselves, then I will agree that we should marry you. So they got all the boys to circumcise. And on day number 3, as it says here in text number 1a, on day number 3, they went and killed and wiped out the entire male population of the entire city. But wait a minute. When Jacob heard about this, as we see here in text number 1b, he told his sons, I am very upset at your behavior. But the sons responded, as we see here in 1b, do you want our daughter to be a prostitute? Of course we had to stop this behavior. They said that this is a red line. We cannot handle this. But we must understand, how is it possible that they wiped out the whole entire population? So there's many answers to this, but today we're going to discuss possible 4 answers. The Maimonides says, even non-Jews need a court to decide for something that they did wrong, because they're liable for death. And if they didn't have a proper court that brings them to the proper judgment, then they're responsible and they deserve death, and that's why they wipe them out. Another commentary explains that they deserve death because they bowed to idols, and they already deserve death anyway. Another idea was They wanted to kill at least one person, Shem, which raped their sister. But as soon as they decided to go and kill him, the rest of Shechem came attacking Shimon and Levi. So they had to make a plan to wipe them out. So they were protecting themselves. In other words, the bottom line was, we see how they answered their father and explained to their father why they wiped the city out. How old do you think Shimon and Levi were at this point? You would think they were mature adults. We would definitely not think that they were only at the age of 13. Surprisingly enough, they were 13 years old. At the young age of 13. They had the courage to go and wipe out the entire city. Just at the age of 13. From this verse, it teaches us that the age of bar or bat mitzvah, to become an adult, we learn out from Shimon and Levi's age, because it says the word ish, and ish means they became a man. But it's hard to understand this concept. Why at the age of 12 or 13 is a child bar mitzvah? They're not mature. Number one. Number two, why would we learn bar mitzvah from a bloody behavior of killing out the city? Bar and bar mitzvah is a mature age of Judaism. Why would we learn out spirituality from an act of killing? If 12 and 13 is such a magic number, why do only Jews honor this and not everyone else? Well, on the surface, the age of 13 does not seem such a profound transition. But our sages say that a profound age begins at 13. This is the process of maturity. It's a long journey. It takes time. But the journey begins at 13 years old, as we see here in text number 3. When we think about maturity, we think about a man that's calm, collective. He can make proper choices. Someone that can make a calm decision, focus. But when the Torah speaks about maturity at the age of 13, the Torah is not talking about that they have a lot of intellect. We're speaking about an emotional intellect, which could relate to things outside of themselves. This is the idea of turning 13. They could relate to other things besides themselves. They become a little less selfish. A child is not impacted, as you see here in text number 4a, if his parents are poor or his parents are rich. It doesn't impact the child. He might have some intellect, but he doesn't have understanding. Children only worry about things that affect them. Like when COVID hit, it didn't affect the behavior of the children. They weren't worried. There could be a crisis in the home, but the child is still playing with his toys. It does not affect his life, and they're not worried. And just like it's with wealth and poor, the same thing is when it comes to the mitzvot. One of the reasons that a child is carefree is because they don't feel the outcome of their behavior. They don't feel when they do something bad or good. Even commandments, they don't feel the importantness at all, because commandments are outside of themselves. They still cannot feel it. Anything outside of their little mind, they cannot connect to. But when they get a little older, they start learning how to fear, how to love, how to have pleasures, how to be more concerned. When the Torah tells us that Shimon and Levi, when the Torah tells us that Shimon and Levi were grown men, it means that they felt worry. And the opposite also, not only they were worried, but they were concerned about their daughter, about their sister, to not be taken by Shechem. So at the age of 13, there's a certain empathy that you don't have until 13, and a girl, 12. At 13, you start thinking abstractly, and you start being worried about others that are approximately this age. It doesn't mean that the child starts behaving like a mature adult. The behavior of Shimon and Levi was not so mature, but they had empathy. There wasn't so much change in their life, but it begins at 13. Even though you don't see it, but it begins to blossom at 12 or 13. 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy. And that's the time they start becoming liable to keep the mitzvot. The determination of our sages thousands of years ago has been revealed today in modern day through science. This psychologist will explain to you that teenagers become more abstract and have more empathy when they become in the teenage years. Our sages say that at the age of 13, there are two things that happen. The strength to think outside your box and the strength to worry about others. He starts considering his impact on others and on the future. This is the beginning of empathy. And it makes sense because that's when he starts being liable to keep the mitzvot. This is also the time that his brain starts to go through psychological changes. Neurologists that study the human brain say that you see a significant change approximately in this age of 12 or 13. He starts thinking faster, makes more effective decisions. So basically, we see that at 12 or 13 years old, the child starts thinking outside of himself. It's a time that he starts thinking on a higher level and much quicker. And this starts at approximately the age of 11 for a girl and 12 for a boy, and it matures by 12 at a girl and 13 by the boy. So it takes time to develop. Now we can understand why the age of bar and bat mitzvah starts at the age of 12 and 13. But we still don't understand how would we learn out a mitzvah from such a bloody behavior. Now we're going to explain that even though it looked violent and the behavior looked really bad because they wiped out an entire city, however, now we're going to explain why we learn out bar mitzvah from a bloody behavior. Because there's another aspect and a holy lesson we can learn to our service to God. With an introduction, even though we explained that you start being liable for mitzvot at the age of 13 because it's maturity, but there's another reason that our sages say, which is here in text. There's another reason that our sages bring out in text number 7, which is that it comes from halacha lemoshe misina. It is something that arrives from Moses at Mount Sinai. Moses at Mount Sinai revealed and said that at the age of 13, good evening, Ronnie.
Good evening, Rabbi.
So there's no specific explanation. Just like there's many measurements in the Torah. Like, let's pick an example. A mikvah has to be 40 sa, which is a very specific measurement. A lot of measurements don't have a specific reason. Moses said, God told Moses at Mount Sinai that it's at the age of 13. So there's two opinions when maturity starts. There's two opinions why bar mitzvah is at the age of 13. And the same applies to bat mitzvah. Number one, maturity. Number two, Moses was told this by God. Nothing to do with maturity and any other reasoning. So really, they're not arguing. They're just talking about two different sides of the same coin. There's two ways to serve God: discipline and understanding. Which one is better? To serve God without understanding, which is complete discipline, or to serve God with understanding? Well, the two models are important. It's important to serve God with both of these angles. It's important to serve him with understanding and with discipline. Sometimes you need to understand to have passion, and therefore you need both. If you don't understand, it will become boring. There's a talk from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe that was said in 1925, when the communists in Russia, communism in Russia was very strong. They hated Judaism. They hated religion because they wanted everyone to be equal. Those days, it took nerve of steel and irony and determination to stay loyal to Torah during the communist regime. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe worked very hard to stay strong and be a religious Jew, obviously himself, but to influence others. It took strong determination. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, don't use your intellect, because it doesn't make sense that we should open a mikvah and open a shul and open all these things during the communist regime. It's inappropriate, people would say. But the previous Rebbe said, we must stay strong. Sometimes we must say that even if I don't understand, like the Jewish people at Mount Sinai said, we will do and then we'll understand. Put all your questions and doubts aside to serve God, even in tough circumstances. And this is the strength that's given to the bar mitzvah boy at the age of 13, as you see here in text number 10. He's given a complete soul. His soul comes into his body. He has the ability to surrender to a higher strength. When his mind is filled with doubts, you cannot serve God with your understanding. You have to go above your brain, above your understanding, and go to the essence of your soul, which is a full capacity when you turn 13. And then you could commit fully to Hashem, even if circumstances are tough. And this happens at 13. And now we can understand why we focus on learning this from such a bloody behavior of them wiping out the city of Shechem. First, we understand that the brain develops at 13 and the soul develops at 13. So the question is the main thing the maturity, or the main thing is that it came from Moses at Mount Sinai? But the point is as follows. You will see when Shimon and Levi wiped out the whole city of Shechem, they had this fiery excitement. Of course, not excitement to kill, but this fiery desire to do what's right, to protect their sister from the terrible behavior of Shechem. When we contemplate on the story of Shimon and Levi and their behavior, we will see two elements. They were worried and a fiery commitment to their sister that they loved. And this was what the point was. It breaks all limitations of nature and consideration. When you look at the story, you will see not a bloody story, but a deep, holy connection with godliness. And this is why we learn the bar mitzvah story from the age of 13. We must have a strong, fiery commitment to God, which goes above all logic and explanation. Number one, we must know that at the age of 13, whatever circumstances are going to come your way, even if it's against God or against God's will, you will never give up. You will stand strong and never go against Hashem. You will cling to God with devotion and loyalty. You will ignore all rationalization, anything that's against God and his commandments. If you are strong, then you will be able to understand. First be strong and then use your intellect. And now we can understand why a bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, the drive of a child is so strong that when they grow up, they will continue the strength. Because when we get older, we analyze. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? This is the time to use your intellect. Non-Jews starts much later for other reasons, because the commitment to their religion is a lot different than the Jews. The Jews first wandered in the desert. They first said, we'll do, and then we'll say, we'll do, and then we'll understand. So another time we'll get into the details, but non-Jews only are liable for their laws by the age of 20 or 21. We began the class. Why would you give such sacred connection to God to such young children? And driving a car, you need to be more mature. Well, deep inside, at the age of 13, it turns out that we have examined that at this age, they are given an incredible insight to the unique nature of the Jewish people and the unique relationship with God. It starts becoming revealed at this age. We have strengths in a time of need. Let's utilize our strengths and use them for the right purpose. So basically, the idea is that at the age of 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, we start having less selfish behavior. We become more selfless. And when we become selfless, our focus starts becoming much more connected with godliness and holiness. And that is why it turns out that it's at the age of 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, when their mind becomes stronger and more interested in others and less selfish, even though they're still young children and they still have a long way to go. And we learn this out from the story of Shimon and Levi of this week's Torah portion. Thank you for joining. Any questions, Steve?
So, so the age, I get the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah part, but the age of actually to do the mitzvahs, does that also begin at that age as well? In other words,
Well, they start at 3 years old.
right,
So when the kid is 3, you really have to start getting them started, because if not, by the time they're 12 or 13, they're not gonna keep it. So you need to give them a
so do they become responsible on their own at that point, or is a parent still
No.
responsible?
They're never liable, like to fill in or anything like that. They're never liable till they're 13 years old.
Right, but at that point, they're liable, that's what I'm saying, from the age of the bar bat mitzvah, then they're liable to do it on their own. Does that then not obligate the parents to do mitzvahs on behalf of their children, and the children sort of do it? In other words, they start honoring their parents, right? What age does that start happening?
Well, you start at 3 years old.
3 years old, right?
Yeah.
But then you're obligated. Right.
Because think about it, if a child is liable at 13, if they don't practice, they're never going to do it. They cannot get punished, meaning if they do something wrong, they cannot get punished.
The only thing, it's sort of not related, but so in the 40 years, when Hashem was doing most everything, providing, you were still obligated to do, you couldn't do all those mitzvahs because Hashem was doing a lot for you, right? Or were they still an obligation?
Yeah, that's a good point. They couldn't keep most of the mitzvah.
Right.
I mean, but also the thing was, Moses' desire to go to Israel was because he wanted to be able to keep the 613 commandments.
Right.
So, because a lot of them you can't do unless you're in Israel.
Right.
Like giving 10% and Shemitah, many laws. So God told Moses, "Don't worry, I consider it as if as if you did it." But only Hashem could say that. And Moses obviously didn't like that.
Thank you, Rabbi. Enjoy the wedding.
Okay. Take care. Take care, Ronnie.